Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Forge of Freedom podcast. I'm your host, Alex Uli, and this is episode 114 of the Forge of Freedom. Today, for Monday Gun Day, I'm joined again by Mike Uli. Mike, welcome back to the studio.
Hey, Alex, good to be here.
Yeah.
Happy Easter. Everybody, we're recording this early on Easter morning, and I thought it was appropriate to make sure I let all the Democrats out there and the folks that hate America to say happy Transgender Day of Visibility, according to the White House. I didn't really believe it until I looked it up, but today is the Transgender Day of Visibility.
Well, thanks, Mike. I know you wanted to make sure we didn't miss that this morning. So,
Absolutely.
But also happy Easter to all you folks out there. This won't be out on Easter. It'll be out the day after Easter. But as Mike said, we're recording this on Easter Day, March 31st. So today we're actually going to play a short video. It's actually a clip about, the Toronto Police Department, an officer from the Toronto Police, talking about how to be a better victim. And we're going to
the theme today is you can't make this stuff up.
Yeah.
From Transgender Day to how to be a better victim.
But then we're going to use that video, and that'll sort of lead us into the main topic of discussion for today, which is the lawsuit that the city of Chicago has filed with the help of Everytown for Gun Safety, a Bloomberg-funded organization, against Glock, and basically wanting them to redesign their firearm because criminals modify them and use them in ways that are illegal. So anyway, with that being said, let's get into the video. We're just going to watch a short clip here, and then we'll get into the discussion.
Well, Michelle Mackey joins us now to talk about a recent story that you did, Michelle, that talked about grabbing. You've gone viral with this story a lot on social media, and with some surprising advice from a Toronto police officer about how to prevent auto thefts. So can you catch us up here?
Yeah, so last month at a community safety meeting.
Notice the intro there. It says it's about how to prevent auto theft. All right,
this thing's getting better all the time.
the more you watch this,
the better it gets. Yeah.
Etobicoke, Toronto police advised residents there that if they have their key fobs for their vehicles in a Faraday pouch, to leave that at the front door, so that if thieves are brazen enough to break in, they can just kind of grab it and go. And I believe we have a clip.
All right, so let's pause it there for just a moment. Mike, you want to say, what's a Faraday bag?
Well, for a Faraday bag is, and I'm like this reporter here, I'm not an expert, but they're bags that basically are some sort of metal mesh material. They're very light, but you can put an electronic device in it, and it basically cordons it off from the world so that signals can't get into it or out. They're commonly used for folks that prepare for EMPs, electromagnetic pulse events, but they would prevent, in this context, a signal from getting from your key fob out, or for a signal getting into the key fob into the Faraday bag. I'm not sure I explained that, but that's what it does.
So the way the reporter has set this up, and we're going to watch the clip from the Toronto police here, is the advice, as she summarized it, and we're going to listen to it here, exactly what the officer says, but is to put your key in a bag and leave it at your front door so that a criminal, a thief, who might otherwise break into your home to steal the key to get your car, could just have the key ready for them at the front door.
And I think they've been using these Faraday bags because evidently thieves can somehow get the signal from your key fob to take your car.
Yeah.
And there's no question there's a problem with car theft. This is in Canada, the land of Justin Trudeau, the liberal tyrant. But that's what the Faraday bag is all about within this context. When I've watched this the first time, I wasn't sure if they wanted me to put my key fob outside my door to even make it more convenient, or leave it inside the front door, but whatever. That's
and
it's inside the door, I think, is what they're advocating.
And notice here too, the line at the bottom of the news broadcast is new auto theft tips from Toronto police.
It's sorry.
It's not trying to prevent auto theft, by the way. It's just new auto theft tips.
Well, these thieves need this.
Yeah, exactly. All right, here we go.
Of that original advice, so let's watch what they had to say.
To prevent the possibility of being attacked in your home, leave your fobs at your front door. Because they're breaking into your home to steal your car. They don't want anything else. A lot of them that they're arresting have guns on them, and they're not toy guns, they're real guns They're loaded.
They're
I
loaded.
mean, he's right, but a lot of people are upset saying, what? Like, are you giving up on trying to catch these guys? Like, it's creating quite a fear.
It is. And I want to explain a little bit of the context as well, because what they're saying is if you put your key in a Faraday pouch, this is like basically a signal blocker. I'm not a tech expert, but some of these
It's
thieves,
a heavy pouch.
Exactly. And some of these thieves are doing relay attacks. So they're using a device, they're coming in, and they are then extending the signal of your fob to steal your car. But if they are not able to use that device because you've got it in a Faraday pouch and they're brazen enough to break in, police are saying just minimize the contact. A lot of them have guns.
Definitely. And it's terrorizing people.
Absolutely.
But I think, also we have to, and the federal government.
So here the officer's advice is the context. We can't protect you, and our government doesn't allow you to protect yourself. So just give the thief your car.
Exactly. It's just a car.
Just let them have it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Don't try to protect yourself or your home. Don't engage. Just let them have it. Just let them have what they want. We're not going to try to stop them.
But you know what? It's funny. We laugh at this morning, and it is quite hilarious, actually, in one context. But folks, this is what's coming to America if we don't wake up. This is what a lot of Americans would like to see in terms of how we live in this country and the attitudes that they have. They're absolutely helpless individuals.
And this is good context to begin the discussion about the lawsuit against Glock with respect to the Glock switches, which we'll get into more in just a moment. But lots of folks I'm sure have heard about news about violence and violent crime in a lot of the major big cities because of soft on crime policies where, it sort of started with this defund the police movement and with liberal mayors who, have engaged in bail reform and sort of let violent criminals out with little or no bail. And they're looking for a scapegoat. How can we explain this rise in violent crime in our cities without taking responsibility for our actions that have contributed to that, right? And so one of the ways that they're doing this is by trying to sue Glock. For instance, with the City of Chicago lawsuit, which was recently filed, I think March 19th. And I'll pull up the complaint here in just a moment. And I don't want to get into the details of the complaint too much, but we want to go through some of the highlights.
I was going to say something about this, just a couple little points, and this is not our legal class on the justified use of force, but thank goodness I'll give a little positivity here for living in the United States, and in particularly one of the free states in the United States, Indiana. We have what's called a castle doctrine, and allows you to use reasonable force to include deadly force if you believe it's necessary to prevent or terminate unlawful entry into your home, your occupied motor vehicle, and I said occupied motor vehicle, or your curtilage, and we're not going to go into that. But you can use deadly force to prevent an unlawful entry into your home in Indiana. But here's what I want to say, just to make sure people understand. In Indiana, and with the possible and limited exception of Texas, Indiana, like other states, you can't use deadly force to protect property. So if you're involved in a situation where someone's stealing your vehicle outside your home, you can't open up your front door and use deadly force at that juncture. You can use reasonable force. That's outside what we want to talk about this morning. But I think that's important and something I want to make sure that we're thankful for.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up because, yes, even in free states, and this is the way it should be. I mean, I think it's consistent with our notions of proportionality. You can't take a life for something that's less than a life, i.e. property, including a vehicle. But that's not what's going on here in Toronto. I mean, they're talking about somebody breaking into your home to steal the keys to take your vehicle, right? Mm-hmm. So it's not just breaking into your vehicle to take the vehicle. This is something completely different. They're breaking into the most intimate place where you conduct the intimate activities of daily living. So,
and the police are advocating to be able to help the criminal so they can find the keys close to your front door, as opposed to being burdened with going through your house and looking for them.
Right. But so we're going to talk here about the lawsuit against Glock. And I talked about sort of the context. These liberal governors and mayors are looking for a scapegoat for their policies that have led to increased violence in their cities. But the other thing, too, is remember, no matter how great the officer is, and there are lots of great police officers, they cannot be everywhere all the time. And you are your own first responder. And even if they do arrive, oftentimes, even if the criminal is captured, what's called the clearance rate on violent crime in the courts is very, very low. Less than half, far less than half of violent crimes are resolved or solved, rather, in the court system. So you are your own first responder. You cannot rely on the government to protect you. And I think that's obvious for most of our listeners. So anyway, with that said, Mike, let's get into this lawsuit by Chicago against Glock. What's the deal here? What's going on?
Well, I guess first of all, a little background about these Glock switches. A Glock, and I think if your listeners probably know what a Glock 17 or a Glock 19 is. It's a typical service sort of semi-automatic pistol that you'll see police carrying and a lot of private citizens as well. But they're a semi-automatic firearm, and what that means is there's one bullet discharge from the muzzle every time the trigger's pressed, and then you have to press the trigger again to discharge another round. There is such thing as a Glock 18, which is an automatic firearm, meaning you press the trigger once and it'll continue to fire until the magazine is empty. Well, one of the things that's been going on,
as long as you continue to hold the trigger,
hold the trigger back. There are these devices called Glock switches, is what they've been called, and these are relatively inexpensive. I've seen in the press and ATF press releases, they cost probably now, I don't know, $20 to $50. They're relatively inexpensive. They're made in bulk. They come from China predominantly. And with the advent of 3D printing presses, they can be made relatively inexpensively with that technology.
And most importantly, they're not made by Glock.
They are absolutely not made by Glock, not advocated by Glock in any way whatsoever, to be used with their perfectly legal firearms that they sell in this country. But I think it's my understanding, and I don't have one, never seen one that I know of, except pictures on the internet. But evidently, they sometimes come with markings to make them look like they're official Glock pieces of some sort. Like they may have the Glock name on them or some kind of number or a patent thing, whatever. So they're deceptive. And these things that are coming in from China or wherever, or printing presses, are deceptive in terms to some people that they are official Glock hardware. They are not. They can evidently turn a perfectly legal Glock into a full automatic firearm, which would make it a machine gun and illegal to possess in the United States by most people, unless you're government potentially. And that comes with a potential prison term if you're convicted of, I think, 10 years in prison and probably $250,000. So these have become more prevalent, and the city of Chicago has decided, instead of attacking the people who have violated the law with respect to these switches, or even looking at the sources of these switches, they've decided to sue Glock and make Glock responsible for people who are making these illegal devices that modify their perfectly legal handguns and make them into something that's not legal anymore. And that's Chicago's answer. And by the way, I think it's not just Chicago. There are going to be other folks involved in this as well, other entities, legal entities, states, and we can talk about that in a minute. But once again, this is a typical government move to take responsibility away from the actors who are actually responsible for the criminal act and place it on somebody else who is acting in accord with the law.
And by the way, we're not even advocating for Glock switches to be outlawed. That's just another example of one of these, what we've called malum prohibitum laws. There's nothing inherently wrong with having or using a firearm with a Glock switch, but it is against the law because the government says it's wrong.
Yeah,
right?
You know,
it's not inherently wrong. It's not malum in se.
Yeah, and you know, you see some of these ATF releases and some of the press reports and some of the things that are said by the city of Chicago officials. And I don't know how many people have actually been shot with a Glock pistol that has one of these illegal switches on them. But I do note from the press releases and what I see, it's peculiar to me that they say they're found at crime scenes.
They talk about, and this is in the complaint as well, and also there's a letter from the New Jersey governor that we're going to talk, or Attorney General
yeah,
that we're going to talk about as well, just briefly. They talk a lot about how many times they confiscate these items, and very rarely they'll talk about them actually being used in the crime.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I'm sure it does happen, but they talk mostly about how often they find them.
Yeah, and so it makes me. This becomes a big surprise to you. Skeptical of the government and the information that's coming out from them, and that's consistent with my understanding. Now, I have never shot an automatic Glock. I've shot an M16 in connection with my service in the military, but it's my understanding they are incredibly difficult to shoot, and I would imagine they would be. You've got a very small pistol in a full auto mode; it would be incredibly difficult to shoot, and I'm not sure that they have any. Even if you want to cause harm upon somebody else, I'm not sure how much practicality they would have for that purpose, even if you were a criminal.
So I've got the complaint pulled up here, and you'll see it here on the first page. It was filed March 19th in Cook County, Illinois, which is, of course, the county where the city of Chicago is situated. And it's a civil complaint and demand for jury trial. And basically what they're saying here is that, like you said, Mike, Glock itself, the manufacturer of a perfectly legal firearm that's been on the market, the basic design has been on the market for over 30 years. They should be responsible because other people are manufacturing this device that can turn their product into a machine gun, into an automatic firearm. And so, like you said, they're trying to hold Glock responsible for the criminal misuse of their product.
Mm-hmm.
And they're saying essentially that there are design choices that Glock could make and hasn't made that would make it more difficult for this to happen. So they're trying to get them to redesign their product.
And I'm not trying to, to me, the analogy here is, if you've got a Ford F-150 sitting in your driveway right now, you can go to if you have alcohol in your home, you can get drunk well above the legal limit and go drive that vehicle. I don't think. Now,
are there design choices that Ford could have made to prevent drunk drivers from driving it?
Absolutely.
Yes. But guess what? That would make their product very expensive, extremely complicated. And
the person responsible for driving drunk is me.
Yeah. Not Ford. Yeah. The criminal act is driving drunk.
Or if I use my Ford for some other criminal act, it's not Ford's responsibility. I could use it I'm not sure how they would get around. I could use it to rob a bank. I'm not sure Ford's not responsible for me using a vehicle.
They made the bed too big so they could get too much money in the back of it, right? I mean, it's just there are all sorts of
police or whatever.
It's called a reductio ad absurdum, right? Where you take the premise and extend it to its logical conclusion, and it leads to absurd results. And that's what happens when you do this sort of analysis. But you'll see here in the complaint, they've included a picture, if you're watching this podcast by video, of what these auto sears or switches sometimes look like. They don't all look exactly the same, but you can see this one in particular actually has what looks like a Glock symbol on the back of it. So it makes it look like it's manufactured by Glock.
And that attaches to the back of the slide. The plate on the back of the slide is replaced. And I'm not sure how big they are. Probably 3/4. They're about the size of the slide, but they make the slide protrude to the rear. And there you see a picture. It's my understanding they somehow depress the trigger bar in the Glock to allow it to fire full auto.
If you're just listening to this podcast, I'll include a link to this complaint in the show notes so you can go check it out yourself. But you'll see there's a disconnect that extends into the slide that enables the firearm to shoot automatically. Like Mike said, if you just press and hold the trigger, the firearm will continue to shoot. So anyway, so Chicago has filed suit here in Chicago, but this is the sort of litigation I think that states, attorney generals, and governors are going to. I think some other states are going to jump on board. Some other cities are going to jump on board, basically to try to bankrupt these manufacturers. They don't care about the design of the Glock firearm. The importance, the strategy here is to try to bankrupt Glock.
Yeah,
that's the end goal.
Yeah, and I think you'll find, I'm not sure I have it, but this is backed by, I'm not sure. I think it's Everytown for Gun Safety.
It is.
Is the gun control group that's got billions of dollars behind it.
Yeah, in fact, I'll link to the Everytown for Gun Safety
I think that's
website about this lawsuit. It says on March, and I'll go ahead and share this screen. Oops. Messed it up there. Bear with me. This is the Everytown website. It says on March 19th, 2024, the city of Chicago, represented by Chicago Law Department, Everytown Law, and Paul Weiss, Rifkind, Wharton, and Garrison LLP, filed a first-of-its-kind lawsuit against Glock Inc. They just say right at the outset, the lawsuit alleges that Glock unreasonably endangers Chicagoans by manufacturing semi-automatic pistols in such a way that they can be easily converted into illegal machine guns in a matter of minutes with a cheap quarter-size device called an auto sear. So they're not saying that Glock has done anything unlawful.
No, if they were, I mean, this is not a products liability case. And in terms of somebody is alleging that Glock had a defective design or there was a defective manufacturing, or there was a manufacturing defect of some sort.
Yeah. So anyway, so with that being in mind, Mike, you want to talk a little bit about this letter to the Attorney General?
And I think, and I'll kind of bring this around a little bit, we've heard this is probably overused, but we've heard in the political realm, we've heard this concept of lawfare. I think this is what we're seeing in the gun world is this lawfare. And I think what folks need to understand before we get to this a little bit is just so I need to say it before I forget, is the gun industry is relatively small. We've seen this sort of, we've seen litigation where plaintiffs' lawyers filed class action suits and gone after, for instance, the tobacco industry. But that industry, the pharmaceutical industry, which of course gets government protection, immunity in many respects, the gun industry is very small, and they're much more susceptible to this lawfare sort of approach than one might think. So the objective is to bankrupt these folks. Glock, if you watched our thing about Glock back 2 or 3, 4 months ago, when it was
right after the death.
They've gone through some difficult times in terms of political persecution. So let's hope that I think things will work out. But at a minimum, this is probably going to drive up the price of firearms. Because the gun industry is going to have to contend with this sort of thing. And we see it's not just Chicago. And I might point out Chicago, I think the month before this, in February, filed a lawsuit against like 6 or something major oil companies because they've supposedly been deceptive about, quote, climate change, end quote. And Chicago has leaking basements or something all over the place, and it's Exxon's fault. I'm not sure who they sued, but this is a pattern of what liberal politicians want to do in terms of redistributing wealth and making sure that people with money send that money to other folks, despite the lack of responsibility on behalf of those folks. Bear in mind too,
I mean, this is the end of March. By the time this episode comes out, it's the 1st of April, 2024. I mean, we're right in the heat of election season too. So they're trying to score political points. I can't remember. I think it may have been the Washington gun lawyer I heard use the expression, they're chumming the water.
Yeah.
And so for those who don't know, whenever you go fishing, especially in the ocean, sometimes they'll put out chum, which is just basically junk bait to try to attract fish. And so that's what they're doing here. They're chumming the water to try to score political points for the election season.
But Glock's going to have to deal with this.
Yeah.
Glock's going to have to deal with this. It's going to be ongoing. And guess what, folks? And we're going to talk to these attorney generals in a minute. I'm sorry, but they're using your money They're using tax money. They're using house money. This is not.
They don't have any skin
their
in the
money.
game.
They don't have any skin in the game. They're stealing money from you to sue Glock. And by the way, they're getting some money from Bloomberg and these folks that want to ban guns, essentially confiscate guns. But anyway, I will get to show you the prevalence of this problem. There's a letter I think Alex will put up from several attorney generals. I'm not sure how many there are, and they're the usual suspect. There's 8 or 9, 10 of them.
It's New Jersey, obviously. They're the ones who drafted the letter, but then Colorado, Delaware, Massachusetts, Connecticut, D.C., Michigan, Minnesota, Pennsylvania, Vermont, Washington, Rhode Island, and Oregon. So if you live in one of those states, make sure you reach out and let them know that you don't support their position here. I'm
surprised New York and California aren't in there. But anyway, what this letter is, so this is what we would refer to as a preservation letter. And it's basically writing Glock and saying, hey, we want you to retain all of these records, because if these allegations in the Chicago lawsuit are correct, and I'm sure they believe that, whether they are true or not, they're going to allege they're true. And this is a precursor to these other states, I think, either filing separate lawsuits against Glock or somehow joining in the lawsuit against Glock that's pending in Chicago.
But let's look at this. One of the first things they note in this letter is that the ATF seized more than 5,400 machine gun conversion parts into custody from 2017 to 2021, a 570% increase from the prior 5-year period. They seized. So it's not that they have been used in some way in a crime. It's just that they seized. There's a 570% increase in the seizure rate, which is interesting.
Yeah, they recount some instances, but if you look at their letter, it doesn't seem like these are actually a terrible scourge on the countryside, as they kind of allege here.
Yeah.
Any death is unfortunate, but it doesn't look like they're, I don't know the statistics, but I'm skeptical about how much they're actually used.
But look at what they're saying, what they're requesting here at the bottom. It says, in light of the foregoing, we hereby request that you preserve for future production all documents in your custody or control from January 1st, 1987 to the present. So that's a huge time frame here that they're requesting documents to be preserved and produced. And what they're asking for includes design and development of Glock pistols. So they want proprietary information about the design and development of the Glock. They want information about financial information relating to Glock, because including profit, manufacturing costs, and so what they want to say is that Glock was only concerned about profit here and not preventing the use of their products by criminals or converting their products. So they're saying they're basically going to say they prioritize profit. They made too much profit. They should have emphasized the prevention of the use of their products by criminals. And so this is really sort of private information for most companies, and this is a huge target on the back of Glock. I mean, if you were making a product and you had to give up your design information and your profit and loss information, that's a huge competitive disadvantage when that stuff gets revealed through the public court process. So anyway, Mike, anything else you want to say there about the letter from the New Jersey Attorney General?
I mean, like I said, it's a precursor, I think, to what these other states are going to do, or want to try to do anyway, and join in.
So I'll link to all these resources, obviously, in the show notes. Luckily, this is an article here from Bearing Arms, Kim Edwards over at Bearing Arms. The National Shooting Sports Foundation, Larry Keene, came out, and I want to read you this quote. He says, they, Glock, are being attacked by this lawsuit orchestrated through, and I will say this word, a conspiracy between the White House and Everytown and the city of Chicago to attack Glock and try to blame them for this criminal conduct. It is ridiculous, and Congress needs to investigate this illegal conspiracy by Rob Wilcox, the White House, Everytown, and the city of Chicago. And I think that's exactly what this is. It's a coordinated effort to try to bankrupt a gun manufacturer because somebody else used their product illegally.
Yeah, producing a perfectly legal and very useful product that is, this type of product is incredibly important for the Second Amendment as well. And it's a way for them to attack freedom tangentially
And
or directly.
the other thing I want to mention here is that part of the strategy here is they're trying to get around what we've mentioned previously, the Protection of Lawful Commerce and Arms Act, the PLCAA, which prohibits lawsuit against a gun manufacturer for the criminal misuse of a product. So if a criminal has a Glock handgun and just assuming for argument that it's unmodified and uses it in a crime, just for instance, murder, Glock can't be liable for that murder, okay, unless the product was somehow defective, but nevertheless, they can't be responsible for the murder itself.
Just like Ford can't be responsible for the bank robbery if their vehicle is used in the getaway.
Or the DUI that results in death.
Yeah.
Right? So they're trying to get around this prohibition, this PLCAA protection, by saying, okay, Glock isn't responsible for the robbery, they're not responsible for the murder, but they are responsible for the design choices they make that makes it easier for the criminal to use it unlawfully. Okay, so they're trying to find a loophole in this PLCAA so that they can bankrupt the manufacturer. Right? Any thoughts on that, Mike?
No, except it's all true.
So one last thing here before we close up, I want to share a couple images, which I think are just sort of instructive, but also a little bit entertaining. These are from Daniel Mitchell. And Daniel Mitchell, if you don't know, he runs the website International Liberty, Restraining Government in America and Around the World, which has excellent content. I definitely encourage you to go check it out. He covers all sorts of topics, but he also covers gun control. And he shared a couple of images that I want to share with you. I think this is really the goal of, aside from bankrupting Glock and gun manufacturers, is to turn what is a useful tool in the hands of responsible citizens into basically nothing. Okay, nothing more than a club. Okay, so just assume that the Glock is the fork, that a Glock with the switch is the tactical fork or the assault fork. What these companies want to do, what every town wants to do, what the city of Chicago wants to do, is to leave you with this, so that you have to follow, and this brings us back to the beginning, you have to follow the advice of the Toronto police at the beginning and just let the criminal take your car keys. Because they want you to have the plastic spoon, the plastic spork to defend yourself with, essentially. Okay.
And eventually, they don't want you to have that either.
Yeah, right.
And by the way, for you folks out there that are employed by the government, a police officer, that sort of thing, and you think, oh, I'm always going to have a firearm, they want to get rid. I mean, that may go away too if you look at
many officers in Europe don't have firearms either.
Yep. So, and the military still does in those countries.
Yep.
But anyway,
so then the last one I want to share here: a gun in the hand is worth more than the entire police force on the phone. So this gets back, like I said, to the beginning. You are your own first responder. The government can't protect you all the time, won't protect you, has no duty to protect you, and they want to leave you helpless so that you have to leave your keys to your car at your front door, hoping that the criminal won't invade your home. Okay? You are your own first responder. Don't let it get to this point.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Right. And what can we talk about a little bit next week, maybe, or you got a quote there?
I got a quote, but
okay.
I think next week we're going to talk.
Well, it kind of ties into what you just said as a reason.
Yeah, go ahead.
Another way that the government wants to preclude you from being your own first responder is another initiative by the Biden administration. They have come up with this new organization within the confines of the executive branch called the National Extreme Risk Protection Order Resource Center. That is a mouthful. And I think we're going to talk about this next week. But what this is designed to do, basically, I think, we'll get into it more next week, is to create a national resource so that if you're a disgruntled ex-spouse and you want to take away firearms from your ex, for instance, you're going to be able to get online and go to a website and click on your state and start the process so you can take firearms away from somebody that you're displeased with without any due process of law. And then there'll be this national database of folks that shouldn't have firearms according to somebody. And I think that's what's coming. Or what they're trying to do. And we're going to talk about that some next week, I think. Luckily for us, Joe Biden put Kamala Harris in charge of this new office. So that's kind of the
epitome of incompetence.
Yeah, the epitome of incompetence. So we have some hope here that this won't go anywhere. We look and see what happened to the border. And I equate this a little bit to that. If you remember during all the COVID debacle, they came out with, what was it? The ministry, it wasn't the Ministry of Truth. I'm thinking about 1984, but they came out with something like this government board or body that was going to somehow declare what was truthful in the social media world.
Yeah.
And that's sort of the way I'm thinking about this a little bit. So
it was like the disinformation task force or something. I don't remember the name of it, but it was something like that.
Yeah. And you got a quote. I'll save my quote for next week. It's from 1984. And if folks haven't read Orwell's 1984, they need to go back and read it because they'll see it playing out here right in front of their eyes.
So the quote here is from James Madison. It says, "A standing military force with an overgrown executive will not long be safe companions to liberty. The means of defense against foreign danger have been always the instrument of tyranny at home. Among the Romans, it was a standing maxim to excite a war whenever a revolt was apprehended. Throughout all Europe, the armies kept up under the pretext of defending have enslaved the people." So, a lot of people discount and have forgotten what the wisdom of the founding fathers and the things that they learned from history. And if, it goes along with the saying that those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And I don't think history repeats itself exactly, but it certainly rhymes. I heard somebody say that. And I think that we're seeing that today, that we're seeing people forget the wisdom of the past and falling into the mistakes that others have made. So, let's do what you can to protect yourself, to protect your loved ones. It starts with you. It starts with the individual. Only individuals can think, can act, can value, can do those things. And tyranny grows through the inaction of the individual. So take responsibility for yourself, get engaged in your local community, and you'll be ready. You'll be more prepared when these sorts of things happen, when history makes a turn and goes through the inevitable cycle, that we've seen over and over again.
Yep. And, the founders were very skeptical of a standing army, rightfully so. Today, I'm not so skeptical of the army per se, the standing army, but it's this mega federal civilian.
It's a militarization of the police apparatus.
The police, it's a police state. And I was in East Germany when it was a police state, and we don't want that here. But I fear that's the direction that we're heading. And we'll talk about that some more next week when we talk about red flag laws.
Yeah. All right, Mike. Well, thanks for tagging along today. Thanks everybody for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed the show. Hope you learned a little something. As always, don't forget to like and subscribe to help us spread the message of freedom. You can always find us on YouTube, Facebook, Rumble, and all the most popular podcast streaming platforms. You can also find me on Twitter at Forge of Freedom, or on X. I'll continue to call it Twitter for quite a while, I think. And then you can also find us on our website, forgeoffreedom.com, where you can see the show along with all the show notes, including a summary, takeaways, and the time and chapter stamp. So anyway, keep a lookout for that. It's searchable. So if you have a topic that you're interested in, there's lots of topics that we've covered in 114 episodes. So go there and check it out. And until next time, remember, you are the Forge of Freedom.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Forge of Freedom. Be sure to subscribe wherever you heard this podcast so you never miss a future episode. For more information or to connect with Alex, you can go to forgeoffreedom.com or follow him on Twitter at Forge of Freedom. Until next time, remember, you are the Forge of Freedom.